Howdy, image bearers. Welcome back to Christian Craft, where we talk about God, the Bible, and just about everything else. In this video, we're going to continue making some progress on our base. Probably get the storage area situated. Probably get the storage area situated. Maybe make some outside aesthetic progress. But before we get to that, we have gained 26 subscribers. So, if you don't know what we're doing here, for every single subscriber, we plant some wheat. Every seed represents a subscriber. So if you want to be added to this wheat field, go ahead and subscribe. Thank you guys so much for your love and support. It's so amazing to see this field grow every day. Guys, there's a lot of things that I want to talk about. But let's stay on a single point, okay? I was meeting up with some friends last night, some Bible study friends. You know, we're talking about Genesis and interpreting Genesis and our views and so what and such forth. What? I don't know, whatever. And yeah, so one of my friends is like, you should make a video on Genesis. I feel like that's a lot to unpack. So we're going to probably put that on hold, but coming up, my interpretation of Genesis. It's going to be an annoying video because pretty much everything is going to be prefaced with, it's very complicated. I don't know for sure, but here's what I think. So maybe we talk about something where I'm a little bit more sure of what I think. I know a lot of people have been asking about the morality of God in the Old Testament, you know, things like Abraham and Isaac, Israelites, wiping out the Amalek, you know, lots of questions about the morality of God. And I'd like to talk about that today, but I think we'd be skipping some steps if we were to dive right into that. And let me explain what I mean. Also, guys, just realized maybe this is a bad topic for what I wanted to do today, because I wanted to organize these chests. However, I am not going to be very focused because I'm very bad at multitasking. 1, 2, 3. Anyways, whatever. Let's figure it out, shall we? Let's just get all these chests in place at least, and then maybe we organize off camera. Cool? Cool. But these questions about God's morality are either really interesting to me or really uninteresting to me. And what determines whether they're interesting or not interesting depends entirely upon the nature of why it's being asked. Most of the time, when I'm asked, why would God command someone to kill their child? Why would God command Israel to genocide these people? Why does God permit slavery? Why? These questions, I think, are very good, honest questions that many Christians wrestle with throughout their life. And I think there are satisfying answers. I do think that. But when these questions are asked from a perspective of, I've already made up my mind about how I think about the God of the Bible, I'm just asking these questions so that you kind of buckle and get uncomfortable. What I mean by this is whenever somebody asks me, why did God command genocide, right? Because by our human definition of genocide, it is the complete annihilation of a group of people. Whether it's for a stated good or bad reason, almost always people try to justify genocide. You see, it's hard to get behind genocide if you just say, yeah, there's no reason behind it, right? But our definition of genocide is simply the act or stated act of annihilating a people group, right? And God tells Israel, wipe out completely this society. Their men, their elderly, their women, their children, their animals. That's in the Bible. It's like the only recorded instance of God condoning genocide. And it's interesting because, like, that's a passage our politicians love to go to. And it's kind of sick, to be honest. You know, a lot of our politicians are like, see, we must wage war on Amalek. And it's like, ugh. The difference is America is not the unique arm of God's kingdom on earth. Whatever. I'm getting lost in the weeds. I didn't even want to address this specific question today, but now I'm kind of in too deep and I might have to because I've already set the stage for it, but whatever. Besides the point. Besides the point. The question of why did God command genocide, right? That's our human definition of genocide. That's the internationally agreed upon definition of genocide. I don't really want to dance around the definitions. I would more so talk about the morality behind it and thinking biblically about it, which I guess we're kind of in too deep now that we kind of have to just talk about it. But to my original point, if the question is posed by an atheist who already has their mind made up about God, I kind of always just ask, why are you asking this question? If I give you a satisfying answer, are you now blank percent more open-minded to Christianity? And almost always the case is, no, even if the God of the Bible were true, I would not worship him. Even if the Bible is true, even if God existed, even if Jesus is fully man, fully God, died for you out of love for you, when I ask all of those specific things, you know, suppose for sake of argument, it's true that the Bible is true, every word of it is true, that God exists, that he loves you, that he sent his son, who is fully man, fully God, to die so that you can live in eternal holy communion with the Holy Spirit on this earth until you are caught up in heaven. And oftentimes they say, yeah, I would not worship that God, even if true. So then I realize, you don't understand what Christianity is. You have an emotional barrier, and emotional doesn't mean irrational. I'm not saying irrational. But there is clearly an emotional barrier here. Clearly an emotional barrier here. So, if somebody tells me honestly, yeah, I wouldn't believe in Christianity even if it were true, that's an emotional problem, not an intellectual one. So I don't know to what extent me thinking biblically is going to convince a person who says, no, I'm going to reject the Bible even if it's true. I would rather just pray for that person and love that person and be kind to that person. And not that that's mutually exclusive. I think telling the truth is loving, it is kind, it is necessary. But I'm more so saying, I would rather answer these questions to somebody who's actually wanting to receive an answer. You know? this is... What do I do up here? Because, I mean, I can have more chests going up, but then I kind of need like a way to get to them. Well, let's experiment, shall we? Oh, wait, it's because it's at the top. All right, let's experiment, shall we? I don't feel like doing that. I don't really know what to do here. Let's just leave this for now, okay? Let's just leave it for now. Let's make shelves. What is this? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10 shelves. That's pretty expensive, isn't it? How do you make shelves? Oh, do you have to strip them all? Let's figure this out. But long story short, if there's a Christian saying, "Yo, image bearer, I'm really wrestling with how this genocide is consistent with Jesus's views of nonviolence," that's an excellent question. If an atheist says, "I don't understand how this is consistent with God's nature. I don't think I would worship a God who condones these things," then I'll answer that question in good faith. But if the position is, no matter how you answer this, I'm not going to worship God, then why would I spend any time trying to answer? Why would I spend any time trying to resolve that? Independent of how I resolve it, you've already made your conclusion. Oh, wait a minute. This doesn't work. I need to make these into stairs. So, before we get into this topic, I want you to honestly ask yourself, what does the answer to this question, what is it going to accomplish? Are you going to become a Christian if I give you a satisfying answer to this question? I imagine if you're not a Christian, you have many reasons you're not a Christian. Right? I imagine you have many reasons why you're not a Christian. So is this the biggest question you have? Is this the biggest objection? And if I relieve this objection, then it's like, oh, well, now like 10% of my doubt is gone. Okay, cool. Then I will answer this question. But it's really disheartening discussing with people. And it's like, what evidence do you have for Christianity? It's like, well, here's my evidence. It's like, well, that's a religious claim, so it's not evidence. I'm like, all right, cool. What are your own individual reasons then? Oh, well, this is what I've experienced. Yeah, well, just because you've experienced it, I haven't seen it. You know, it's like, oh, so no amount of evidence will convince you. Cool. Like, at least be honest that no amount of evidence will convince you. So, if you're watching this video and you're curious, maybe you're just curious. I like answering just curious questions. So if you're curious, hopefully I can try to answer some questions for you. Is this going to look hideous? It's fine. We're covering this up anyways. I'd rather have symmetry on the inside of the basement. Wait, no, this looks fine. Yeah, it looks great. Yeah, cool. But it's like we're going to terraform this around it anyways, so it's fine. But even that, I think it looks fine. Oops. I think we've done enough prefacing. We're going to ask these questions in good faith. We're not done prefacing. Actually, I want to keep prefacing because I'm just going to do that because it's my video. kind of like just having open space, honestly. Maybe, nah, we'll probably fill it with something. We'll do something to create depth. I just like it having 3 tall because then I can put things in the shelf to signify what? To show what it is. So like, look, that's the chest for dirt. And this is the chest for stone. And we have no, there's cobblestone. Here's a chest for cobblestone. And here's the chest for deep slate. See what I'm getting at here, folks? Pretty cool. We're not done prefacing. We're not. Because I remembered an important point. And here's the important point. The important point is thus. Does how we feel about God determine if he's real or not? Again, we need to set the standard of evidence and reasonability here. Ask yourself, this is why I asked the question of would you worship God? Because when a person asks if God exists, how can he do XYZ behavior? Are you waging a logical contradiction and thus the impossibility of God? Or are you saying God is real, but behaves this way? I'm not going to follow him. Right? We need to be honest about what our questions are getting at. Because to ask, why did God do this in the Old Testament, assumes that God exists, assumes that the Old Testament accurately portrayed and documented what occurred, right? That's kind of my point, is these questions are they have so many assumptions. Are you granting these assumptions for argument's sake? Or do you actually concede those points and say, yeah, I do believe God exists. I'm just trying to figure out if it's the Christian God. Yeah, I believe God exists. I'm just trying to find out if the Bible's reliable, right? Like, there's so many assumptions that we have to make in order to have this discussion. I'm a Christian who believes in the inerrancy of God's word, which means I believe that God's word, as it's written in its original language, is without flaw or error or mistake or contradiction. And I believe it is the ultimate authority for humans. God is the ultimate authority over humans. And the scriptures are his words. Okay, so I need to like zombify you. Prot 4, excellent. Also, where did I put all the emeralds? Oh, it doesn't matter. I have tons of iron. Yeah. So when you ask me a question about the Bible, and I'm a Christian, I'm going to talk about the Bible. If you're asking these questions about why does God do this, you have to assume certain things for sake of argument. If I say, well, I think God did it this because of, I think God did this for XYZ reason. And then you say, well, God doesn't even exist. There's no proof of God. Okay, that doesn't, your question's not a good faith question. You can't have your cake and eat it too. So if you already think God cannot possibly exist independently of this question, if you think the Bible is impossible, if you think miracles are impossible, if you, whatever your epistemology is coming in, if you believe you cannot be convinced Christianity is true, you cannot be convinced that God is a good God, then we can't even have this rational discussion. But if you made it to this point in the video, no more beating down the... Let's just like start the video over. Let's just call it a day. Signing out for now, but no, I'm just kidding. I'm going to assume if you're at this point in the video that you are curious to hear the answer to this question. I'm not saying that this question is going to be intellectually satisfying or emotionally satisfying. I actually guarantee that you're not going to like the answer if you're not a Christian. Because again, we're trying to understand the Christian God from the Bible. So if you don't believe in God and you don't believe in the Bible, you're not gonna like that I'm appealing to those authorities. But you're asking me a theology question. I don't have any other basis for theology other than God, other than the Bible, you know? So we're going to probably call it on organizing the chests, because even just looking through these chests to find emeralds and gold, I can't even think. So let's find our emeralds to get good armor. These are empty. Here we go. Ha! And also, let's set up our enchantment table area. Cool. So this video is going to be similar to the Abraham and Isaac one. I was not planning this, okay, guys? The reason I didn't want to talk about this is because I want to plan for these things. These are complicated issues that have been debated for thousands of years. And I'm a Minecraft YouTuber. And I'll give you my honest answers. I will. But I also understand my limitations. There are... this is what I was kind of telling my friend the other day. I was like, I understand that there's so many people who do this better than me on the internet. The internet is full of amazing Christian content. You know? Okay, cool. It's full of amazing Christian content. So if you just Google genocide in the Old Testament and you check out a Mike Winger video or a Gavin Ortland video or pick your flavor of Christianity video, if you don't like my answer, try out one of theirs. But what I do have to offer, what is unique to me, I'm willing to give off the cuff answers while playing Minecraft. My main form of content is not teaching or being a theologian or Bible study. I'm playing Minecraft while talking about Christianity. So if I make mistakes, have grace for me. If my responses are not to your liking, check out a different video. But like I was saying with the Abraham video, I'm going to pull up the passage and we're going to read it and we're going to try to understand it. But first, let's get out of here. Also, guys, I might have bitten off more than I can chew, to be totally honest. Because I'm looking at the clock, and I know everyone's going to think this is bullcrap because I'm talking about something that this whole video I've been talking about how it's a complicated topic. So now I think everyone's going to be like, you're chickening out. But I do have to go in like 30 minutes because I'm an RA and I'm closing the building, right? I just graduated a few days ago, so everyone's moving out. I need to close the building. So let's see if we can do this in 30 minutes. Maybe we do a part 1, part 2. Let's just do this, okay? I'm sorry if I've built up false expectations. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to talk in the realm of philosophy and logic and God's nature. This is going to be the part 1 of setting the basis, setting the framework. And then we'll do a video where we're reading the Bible, where we're reading the story. So, drop down in the comments, image bear chickened out. That's fine. I've got thick skin. I can take it. It's just literally a time conflict because I started this video saying there's a lot to talk about, but we're going to do it later. And I started talking about it anyways. And I'm like, oh man, I've got a work thing. Anyways. Here's the most important question. Not most important question. I don't even know what I'm saying. Here's unimportant question. There we go. Here's unimportant question. Not unimportant or unimportant or anti-important. An important question. By what standard are we calling God evil? Right? If you believe there's an objective morality and you're saying God behaves in contradiction to objective morality, that's a very reasonable objection that Christians should take very seriously. If you say this is objectively evil and God is doing it, God cannot be called all good and all loving. That is a reasonable objection to the nature and existence of God that Christians should take seriously and hear you out on. I'm guessing if you're an atheist, you don't believe in objective morality because of the implications of it. So then I ask you, by what standard are you calling God evil? When you read something in the Bible and you say, I can't support that, it's evil, by what standard is it evil? Is it your own individual values and attitudes? Because then I would ask you, if God exists, independently of how you feel, should you determine whether he exists based on your subjective experience and subjective attitudes? Could it be possible that your attitudes are misplaced or you misunderstand God? Is that possible? If you're saying, well, I don't believe in objective morality, I don't see the need for objective morality, I'm saying by all basic human standards, ethnic cleansing is bad. I like that argument way better. That is on the surface a much stronger argument. Right? So if you don't believe in objective morality, by what standard are we calling God evil? When I hear most people pose this question, they pose it in the strongest formulation, right? Because I think we can all honestly assess if there is no objective morality, but we're entertaining that God exists, then we're assuming there's an objective morality, right? So that's, in one sense, that's the case, right? In one sense, that's the case. We're assuming God exists, so we're assuming objective morality. But let's say we're having a logically unproductive conversation and we're saying, let's assume God exists, the God of the Bible exists, but objective morality doesn't exist. That would be a dumb way to formulate that question on my part, not yours. On the Christian's part. If the Christian is saying, try to understand God without understanding biblical morality, right? Like, then that Christian's setting you up for failure. I think the strongest formulation of this question, which is the one often posed, so good for you atheists, is that God's nature seems to be in conflict throughout the Bible. Namely, the person of Jesus and the person of the God of the Old Testament, we don't see those as compatible, right? I think that, let me know if you think that's a fair assessment. I think most people take issue not with, oh, this is my individual opinion on God, or this is the cultural definition of genocide, right? But an actual calling into question the consistency of the Bible. We're calling into question the consistency of the Bible. I think that's an important distinction to make. Because I think a lot of people, correct me if I'm wrong, a lot of Christians make their arguments out to be stronger than they actually are. And I think a lot of atheists make their arguments out to be stronger than they are. I think Christians can watch a YouTube short of the Kalam cosmological argument and then think that is sufficient for anyone to become a Christian, and to deny God, you are now a fool because of the Kalam cosmological argument, right? Let's be faithful to what our questions actually produce in understanding. Okay? Mending, prop 4. I need unbreaking 3, which means I need to cure you. Cool. Let's cure you too. Oh, this whole thing was about finding gold. That's why I'm running around like a lunatic. We need gold. Let's be honest about what our questions are, the scope of the questions, and what they entail. I'm glad that I decided we're not going to actually read the text today, because this would be a 4-hour video. Because this video itself is going to be like an hour, hour and a half, and it's just me explaining the context and assumptions behind this discussion. Which I guess that's what's unique about my content. Because if you click a video, how do we understand genocide in the Old Testament from a Christian perspective? It might be a 15-minute video that gets right to the point. And this is, hey, we're playing Minecraft. Do you like Minecraft? We're also going to talk for an hour about structuring arguments before we even get to the argument. Smash like. So, we might go get some gold, guys, honestly. Are we totally out of gold? Might be go mining for gold. So back to being honest about the scope of these questions. Let's not make these questions out to be stronger than they are. Let's assume, for sake of argument, the question is, how can God be morally just? How can God be consistent? How can God be good? Pick your formulation. How can God be consistent if he commands genocide at one point in the Bible and also prohibits it at other parts of the Bible? Is the nether's probably not a good place to get gold. I'd imagine we should just go in the cave, because I don't want to die, especially with the levels I have. So if the question is, I see God as inconsistent throughout the Bible, does that disprove God? Is that a smoking gun argument that God is impossible, that it is now unreasonable to believe in God? Or is that question about biblical interpretation? Right? Because you are reading a part of the Bible and comparing it to other parts of the Bible. In the absence of scriptures, this would not be a conflict we have about God's nature. The conflict about God's nature would be similar to like the problem of evil, where it is an abstract problem. Where's my mending one? Guys, I need to organize these things off camera so badly. This is a question about biblical interpretation and biblical consistency. This question about the Bible. If in the absence of the Bible, could God exist? Yeah, that's possible. And if we were in the absence of the Bible, we wouldn't point out specific instances of the Bible. We would point out specific instances in human history, right? How could a good God permit World War II? How could a good God permit cancer in children? How could a good God permit animal death, right? All of these excellent questions. The problem of evil is without a doubt the strongest objection to God, in my opinion. I would say the two strongest objections to God would be the problem of evil and hiddenness, right? The hiddenness of God and the problem of evil, I think are definitely the strongest objections to Christianity. I'll say it like that. And this question of genocide in the Old Testament is a formulation of this problem of evil, where it kind of addresses the problem of evil while also calling into question the Bible, right? Powerful question. It's a powerful question. If you can call into question God's morality and the Bible. I think that's how it's often viewed. But I think in reality, if the question in a vacuum, right? Because if you pull in a bunch of questions together and it's like, give me an answer to every single question, right? If you're wanting me to answer God's hiddenness, the problem of evil, and interpreting genocide in the Old Testament, then you're going to be very unsatisfied. You're going to be very unsatisfied because I can't answer all those questions with one answer. I need to address each of those questions on their own, right? So this question of bringing it all together, why am I asking by what standard do you call God evil? It's an important question, right? Because same thing with the problem of evil, fundamentally, is to say, why do we suffer? Why is there evil? That's not a very strong objection to Christianity. If you're saying, I don't believe in objective evil, but I think God is evil, right? That's not very strong. But I don't really know of many intelligent atheists. Sorry, that's just the truth. I don't know many intelligent atheists who pose that question. They more so pose under the assumption of God and the assumption the Bible is true. There is objective morality. There is good and evil. There is death and suffering, which is bad. The Bible speaks of suffering and sin as bad, but also the Bible speaks of God being sovereign. That's in conflict. Okay? I hope I've made it very clear. I'm going to try to summarize it again. I thought I brought my mending one, but whatever. Let's make it very clear. God behaves immorally. To make that claim is to appeal to a moral standard. So what moral standard are we appealing to? If you're an atheist and you don't believe in objective morality, you really only have two options. What the heck? You really only have two options if you're posing this question. some subjective standard is the standard by which you're calling into question God's morality, whether it's a cultural one, whether it's determined by a majority, right? It's determined by just what humans think. If you're applying the, Geneva Conventions, if you're applying that, that's the standard I'm appealing to. Or this is my own personal attitude, is I think genocide is bad, and other people who disagree with me, I think they're wrong. Like, whatever. I think we don't need to spend much time addressing that perspective, because I think all of us intuitively recognize if we're entertaining that a God exists, then there is objective morality. If we're entertaining biblical discussion, the Bible's quite clear about morality and its nature and how it's absolute. So this question is not some all-powerful question. It's not some all-powerful objection against Christianity and against God's existence and against God's fundamental nature, because we're able to assume that independently of the Bible. Independently of the Bible, we can assume a maximally great being. And the Bible, from the Christian perspective, is a gift to us where God speaks to us directly. Right? So now we're saying we can understand God abstractly. We can understand God intuitively. We can understand God rationally. But now we're actually reading the Bible. We're assuming the Bible's reliable. We're assuming God is a maximally great being. You're assuming God's a maximally great being in order to call out his inconsistencies. Because if God were just the creative force of the universe and his morality were neutral, or his morality is ambiguous and it fluctuates, then there's no conflict, right? God could do bad things. The conflict comes from interpreting Scripture with Scripture. The conflict comes from God here seems to be very anti-violence and God here seems to be very pro-violence. What gives? Right? I hope I am making a fair assessment. I'm trying to steelman. I hope you see that in this video. I'm trying to steelman the atheist position, okay? I'm not going to attack some weak sauce argument. I'm not just going to say, by what standard do you call God evil? You don't even believe in morality, right? I'm not trying to do that. I'm trying to actually build a steelman case in this episode. I'm trying to agree on terms. I'm trying to agree on a definition. I'm trying to get basic understanding of the assumptions involved. And then in a follow-up video, most likely tomorrow's video, I'll actually then get into the argument. So this question is a question of biblical consistency. It's not a question calling into existence God. It's not a question that demonstrates God is an impossible character to understand, right? Go watch my modal ontological argument video. There are a lot of arguments for God's existence independent of the Bible. If you're asking a Christian, yo, how do you interpret this part of the Bible? Oh. If you're asking a Christian how they interpret some part of the Bible, you have to understand. Christians already assume God exists. They have personally known and experienced God to exist. They've been studying the Bible and they assume the Bible to be the inerrant word of God. So if you come into the conversation without those assumptions, you guys are never going to come to a mutual understanding. This isn't about an agreement. This is not about winning an argument. This is not about a debate. I want to bring understanding to each other's views. I want you guys to understand my view, and I want to understand your view. You guys can feel free. I'm glad I'm actually doing this in a part 1, part 2, because then people can correct me in between episodes. But if I'm going to state what I believe is the strongest atheist position with regards to this specific question, is I believe the atheist position is the God of the Bible is not a character I would want to worship. The God of the Bible seems to be inconsistent. The God of the Bible seems to be immoral, where the God of the Bible tells us not to kill, but he kills. It's fundamentally a question of God's nature depicted by the scriptures. Right? Because we can logically arrive that there must be a maximally great being, independent of the scriptures. And then now from that basic assumption of God exists, it's like, okay, now let's investigate who is God? What is his nature? What is his character? Who is he like? What is he like? That's the starting point of now talking about the Bible. Is that fair? Let me know in the comments below. Let me know in the Discord. I'm not saying you guys just are calling into question God inconsistently. Oh no, this is not mending. I'm a fool. If you said there is no objective morality, but God is evil, yeah, that makes no sense. And I hope you understand that makes no sense. If you say there is no objective morality, but assuming God exists and assuming there's no objective morality, yeah, you can't understand God. You're never going to be able to understand God with those incompatible assumptions. It's like, let's understand the Bible under the assumption that the Bible is totally a forgery and made up. Oh, then you're not going to understand the Bible. I hope that makes sense. So now, with all of that being said, this is calling into question the consistency of God's character as described in the Bible. So what does my answer, what does my response to this question actually produce? What does my response to this question actually change? If I'm unable to answer this question, if I'm saying, if I omit, not omit, whatever. If I concede, there we go. If I concede, yeah, I can't explain God's nature here. Is that a boom, Christianity destroyed? Christianity's untrue. Or could it just as likely be a flaw in my ability to explain? Could it be, I believe the Bible's inerrant, but could it be that the Bible is not an accurate account of God? God exists, and the Bible is reliable, but not without error, right? That's kind of what I'm getting at here. This is kind of the fundamental point of this video. If in your mind, you're staking the truth of Christianity onto this question, that's an unreasonable standard. Right? I'm sure you have many reasons. I'm sure you have many reasons why you're not a Christian, and I'd love to hear all of them. But when I'm presented this question, it often feels like people act like this is the end all be all. And if you don't give me a satisfying answer, then your religion promotes genocide. It's like, all right, dude. Okay. Okay. So, I hope we have a mutual understanding. If you made it to this point in the video, I'll reward your patience with a glimpse into tomorrow's video. A glimpse into tomorrow's video and a glimpse into my response. This is going to be a YouTube Shorts level response. Okay? It's going to be very brief. There's not going to be much nuance. If you disagree with it, that's fine. We're going to unpack my response in tomorrow's video. I say tomorrow, maybe it'll be in a few days. I don't know. In part two, we'll unpack this. But if somebody asks me, how is God commanding genocide consistent with his nature? My response is as simple as this. It was the most just thing to do to exterminate those people. That was what was most just. That was what was good. That was what was deserved. That is also what was gracious. It was most just and most gracious to the individuals and to the world collectively that those people be wiped out. That's my position. It was most just and it was most gracious that those people be wiped out. And we'll unpack that in tomorrow's video. Let's end there so that you're actually interested to watch. So you're actually interested in watching the next video. Because how did I just say that genocide is just and gracious? You'll find out next episode. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you made it to this point, please consider subscribing. Drop a like, share the video, join the Discord. Thank you so much for watching. God bless you. Signing out for now, boys. Ciao.